Hi, this is Nancy with On Point TV. We are continuing our series in the block by block Quilt as You Go. So the book again is from Beth Donaldson called Block by Block. Remember, this is the first edition. The second edition had a blue cover, but this book is not available in print anymore, so you're going to have to go to eBay or Amazon or all of your quilting friends. Go to your quilt guild. Say, does anybody have that block by block quilt book from Beth Donaldson? So this is where we're at. We're near the end, and it's time to put the blocks together. I want you to know this can be a very confusing process. I will try to go as slow as I can so that if you don't have the book, you're still able to do this technique. If you have the book, I think it'll make it that much easier. So the first thing we have to do is trim down our blocks. So these blocks have been completely appli-quilted and all of the quilting has been done all the way out to the borders. Now it's time to trim. So here is the rule. Where there is a sashing, you need to trim it a ½ inch larger than what there is. So I'm going to come to the edge here, going to use the ½ inch on my ruler, and this one here I'm pretty close. I'm only able to get just a smidge on that side. The batting is even a little bit smaller, but this one's better. On this, I'm going to add the ½ inch all the way around. So just lining up ½ inch on my ruler and trim. Spin again. And this is the number 3 block in the 4 blocks. So you'll know that this one has 3 sashing sides. And where there is no sashing, like right here, you want to actually trim it even with the edge of the block. So I'm going to line my ruler up and lining it up square with the block itself. Sometimes the sashings will stick out oddly. So I'm going to move this down to make sure that you see this. If I keep this lined up with the edge of the block, you can see that I'm going to trim off some of the sashing up there at the top, and that's okay. I want this edge to be perfectly straight. Oops, got to go a little deeper. All right. So that's the number 3 block. Now I'm going to trim up the number 4 block. Again, just like with the number 3, where there is a sashing, you're going to trim it a ½ inch larger. So for the number 4 block, that means 2 sides. And where there is no sashing, you will trim it to the edge of the block using the block as your guide. There. The next step is actually assembling the blocks. So for this next step, it's done in a couple of steps in the process. So the first thing we need to do is to separate the sashing from the batting and backing on the block that actually has sashing to it. Now on this particular quilt, because I was just doing straight line quilting, I did quilt some of this sashing, so I'm only going to pull it back that far, which is plenty enough. I'm going to flip the block over, and on the back I'm going to move the batting and backing out of the way and use some big needles, so big pins. I do love these clover glass head pins for just about everything that I sew, whether garments or quilting. But these big pins that they call quilters pins, I would never use them in normal quilt making, but they are really fabulous when it comes to Quilt as You Go, because some of these are rather thick sections. So these pins really go in and grab and keep everything out of the way. Now when I flip this back up, this is the block that it will be attached to. So now I'll take this block and flip it over. Now I can pin this, matching up my sashings, being sure that everything matches very nicely there. And I am going to again use those big pins because I'm going through this big batting section, and pin all the way to the other end. And then match this up. Now, sometimes you're going to see this. Look at this. My sashing is about 1/4 of an inch larger than my quilt block beneath, and that's because the quilt block has already been quilted. The sashing has not. You need to be sure that you still match up the ends and ease in the rest of it. If you don't, you actually will get some odd little bubbles in there, but this will work. So pulling this on this end, I'm going to find the middle and put pins in, and I'm going to put probably 6 to 7 more pins just in this section. There. Now I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and we're going to attach this block to the number 3 block to number 4 block. So we're at the machine, and I've moved my needle over to a real 1/4 of an inch. I know that in piecing we always use a scant 1/4 inch. I want a little bit more this time for the quilt as you go technique. And I'm going to just slowly sew over. Yep, I did it. I sewed right over those pins. I do it all the time. Just do it nice and slow and you'll be just fine. Now, sometimes you might hit a pin, but it's never killed me yet. Sometimes it might actually mess up the timing, and that's just when there's time for you to go and visit your sewing machine mechanic, which you're probably not doing often enough anyway. So here, where I needed to ease that extra sashing in, I'm actually kind of pulling the quilt apart to get that ease to go in. It is the proper size, but the reason it seems too big is because the bottom section has already been quilted, and the quilting of a quilt, especially as densely as we did it, is always going to draw up the quilt. So that's why the sashing seems a little bit bigger. And all the way to the end, and I want to do a back stitch here. I want this to be a very strong seam, so I did a little bit of a back stitch and cut it off. Now that we've done the stitching, we're going to lay the quilt blocks out to assemble them. So there's a couple of tools here you can use. One of them is from Marty Michelle. So that is the designer whose book we're going to be using when it comes time to do the borders, which is this book. So this is the same designer and author that also came out with a fusible webbing for putting some of the sections together. Another one you can use is the heat press batting together. That's what we've used to put some of our batting. When you're trying to make your batting last a little longer and you butt the edges, you can take this and just lay it on top and press it. So that's what we're going to use here. So it's all assembled. Let me clear off my ironing board a little bit. Take my extra pins out. And flip it, open it up and flip it over. So I'm going to turn this the other way. There, sorry, got your camera, got your quilt all in the face. So here, I'm going to open that seam, and I want to be sure that it's completely pulled open. So using my iron, I'm going to pull on the right-hand side and then give it a really good press down right here. A little bit of steam in there will help hold it in place. Then take the batting, just remove the batting from the backing now, and we want to trim it so that it trims as evenly to this edge as we can. So here is this edge. So remember, we trimmed this a 1/2 inch bigger than it needed to be because we were trimming to the edge of the sashing. Now we're going to be taking off another 1/4 of an inch. And I like again to use these scissors that are a little bit tipped up, so that when I'm cutting, it's a little bit more comfortable. Either way, no matter what scissor you're using here, you're going to take your time. So folding the batting as you go, getting it to fold right to the edge of the seam on the other block. So it's butting right next to it. It's not overlapping it. Now that's all trimmed so that it's butting right next to the other seam. And now is when I like to use this fusible. Now I'm using it in black this time because my backing is a little bit dark and it'll just be a little less noticeable if it peaks. And what I'm going to do is lay it down with the fusible side down, and it's going to go to just before that 1/4 inch seam that was the seam that I just sewed these blocks together with. But what this will do is hold the batting in place for all of the next steps. So you see how it holds it down there? Come all the way to the end. And then trim that off. Now we need to get this piece to lay over top. What we need to do here is get the fold so that the fold goes just past the stitching line that is holding the blocks together. So it really is a matter of eyeing it more than measuring it. So I'm trying to get that to lay down right over the stitching line. Like I said, it's not a matter of measuring. It really is a matter of eyeing it. I've tried in the past to pre-press it, so I knew that it had to be a 1/2 inch or whatever. Never seems to work. I always end up coming back and having to change that fold, so I never pre-press it anymore. I wait until I'm actually to the back of the quilt. Now that's covering that seam. I want you to again notice this backing fabric, how fabulous this is. With this small, busy, multicolor stuff going on, you can hardly see that seam. Now I'm going to use one of my favorites, some Roxanne's basting spray, and I'm going to glue this down. So this is, in Beth's book, she actually pins it down, but I'm going to glue it down. At least I think I'm going to glue it down. There we go. And just dots of glues. You don't need to have a whole stream of it. And I'm staying inside the seam allowance. And this will hold this in place very nicely for when I'm doing this next technique. I need to cap this so it doesn't dry again. I'll find that in a second. Oh, there it is. All right, see how important this is? You must cap it and keep it right sides up so that it doesn't get stuck. There. Now, because I'm impatient, I'm going to press this until the glue is dry, and then we'll go and sew this down. So I've got the seams attached, and I want to just show you a little bit here. If you see, this is the backing, and it is just a tad bit bigger. So there's the backing and there's the sashing. So just a tad bit larger. And that's going to make this next seam hopefully be pretty nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to again do that on the ledge stitching that I do. Let me get my thread under there. There. So right there next to the edge, that is going to catch that backing fold that I did and secure it down, and it is also quilting on the top of the quilt. This usually works pretty good, but the proof is in the pudding when you get to the back side of it. But before we go to the back side, I'm going to cut off and I'm going to continue quilting this sashing. Once the blocks are together, you can continue any of the quilting that you want to do in the center. For this quilt, it's just a straight line right down the center of that blue. I didn't do any free motion quilting in this particular sashing. I will want to do a little bit of free motioning on the yellow section, but I'm not there yet, so I'm not going to worry too much about it right now. Now we're going to flip it over and see how it looks on the back side if we caught the edge that we wanted to catch. All right, it's a good day. We caught the edge. So you can see here, this is just that little bit of a fold, and my stitching was right on top of it. And I'm looking all the way down, and it looks like I caught it. If you miss it, you do not need to take out all of that stitching. You can just go back and hand stitch any sections that you may have missed. So our blocks are now together. Next time we get together, we will be putting the rows together. So be sure that you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification button so that when we put up another posting with the next steps, you won't miss it at all. See you next time.